Welcome to Autism Weekly, the podcast that discusses autism news, current events, and inclusion. Each week, we welcome a guest to the program to share their unique perspective and expertise as it relates to the fascinating world of autism. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. I'm the founder and president at ABS Kids. I've been in the field of autism and applied behavior analysis as a clinician and advocate for nearly 2 decades.
Each person with autism is unique. They have unique skills, strengths, and levels of supports needed. So how is it that all of these unique children have the same diagnosis? This week, we're excited to talk about what it means to be diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder with clinical psychologist Dr. Jennifer Rogers. Jennifer has years of experience in the field and will share valuable insight into how broad the autism spectrum really is, as well as what it's like to go through the diagnostic assessment process. Dr. Rogers, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Well, we're excited as well. And quite frankly, this is a topic that I think is long overdue. I think as a parent and as a clinician, it's sometimes confusing when you look at a variety of children and you're trying to classify them relatively into the same categories. It just sometimes it's mind-blowing. But before we go there, I really would love to hear, and this is something we ask of all of our guests, but what is that wow moment for you?
Absolutely. So I'm really lucky in that I get to relive my wow moment over and over again in my career and what I'm doing, because the thing that I love the most about my role in psychology and my role in sort of the system of care providers for autistic kids is helping families really understand their child and often reconceptualize their child based on what we're able to learn through the evaluation. So often, one of my favorite moments in feedback sessions is when you can really see for parents something click in how they view their child, and it just can dramatically change how they approach parenting, how they feel about their parent-child relationship, which has often been strained in all the events that have led them to seeking out a diagnosis. And it's just so fun to watch, especially for kids who have been sort of labeled as having a lot of challenging behaviors and defiant and oppositional. And a lot of people come into it feeling like the kid is choosing these behaviors and it's more willful. And so helping families see really what's underneath that is great. And sometimes parents will even, the riff on, now I know we can do this, or, we should look at that. And, when they do this, it means that. And kind of just watching that happen for the families is so powerful.
To get to do that on a regular basis, that's got to be emotional for you, is just seeing families make that click, because there must be a lot of blame being placed just because, I try and help my child, but they're not doing what I'm expecting. Or why is it that I can't get through to my child in this particular situation, where understanding a diagnosis is probably key to that very first step. So when you go through this, and maybe it's taken a step back for everybody here, but how do you help somebody conceptualize autism who maybe never really even knew about it or thought about it beforehand?
In the broadest sense, I like to talk about how autism is a neurodevelopmental difference, right? So it is just a difference in how the brain is developing for that person. And then that affects so many areas of their life. So all sort of the core features we see with autism: social skills, language, communication, executive functioning skills, are all driven kind of just by how the brain's developing. And I think looking at it that way can help take some of the stigma out of it. It's not that anyone did anything wrong. As a parent, there wasn't anything you could have done differently to make autism not have happened. It just is how the brain's developing. And then we sort of work from there.
So would it be fair to say, as a parent coming in, you're coming in with this thought that there's something wrong, but inherently there might not, it's not something's right or wrong. It's something might be different than expected, and that the term disorder might throw people off from time to time?
Yes, absolutely. All of that. It's not a disorder in the sense of a lot of other things. I think there's a lot of movement towards talking to it about as more, autistic spectrum condition, because it's not something that's wrong with somebody. When we talk about giving treatments and supports, it's not to cure your child or fix them as much as their brain views the world differently and interacts with the world differently than the majority of people. And so we need to help them fit into what's expected, understand what's expected in certain situations and have the support to deal with the pressure of everyday life, just in the context of their differences, not because something's bad or wrong.
Yeah, and that's something that probably is hard for a lot of us to think through, just because oftentimes you think that there is a right, a wrong, a correct answer, an incorrect answer. Is that being able to just understand that there's a different processing style. And maybe that's what leads into this, is that this diagnostic and developmental difference.
Yes.
And with autism, I mean, as we all know, is that every child is so unique. Every child's strengths, every child's areas that are barriers, and I guess we'll call those deficits, everything is unique to that individual. So are there core similarities? Because you have to be able to categorize them into something.
Yes. The elephant in the room, the big difficulty here, and some of it, and this might be going back a little bit, but I think is appropriate for kind of the broadness and how we conceptualize autism, is I almost think we did ourselves a disservice in referring to it as a spectrum, because it's not a linear sort of thing, where someone is very autistic or a little bit autistic. There are these core similarities and these core areas that can be affected by autism, and everyone has strengths and weaknesses in each of those areas. And so when we're thinking about the core of autism, we're looking at communication and language differences. We're looking at social skills differences. We're looking at motor skills, executive functioning, sort of flexibility in different areas of life, and sensory difficulties and differences are a lot of the big areas that we're looking at. And so each child has their own unique profile within that. And that goes for autistic people and neurotypical people as well. We all function in all of these areas. And so it's all just about what's unique about that child and where their strengths and weaknesses are at. And that's why every autistic child looks different in the same way that every neurotypical child looks different as well.
When you're looking and you have a family that comes into the room, is that if I were to mention autism, I would imagine that families go from one extreme to the other based off of maybe what they've seen in the media, what they've seen in movies. Is autism, oh, well, that could be the savant, the person that really has extreme strengths in one area, but maybe has not clicked in those other areas to be able to catch up to the strengths that they've developed. Maybe it's in being able to understand and process visually. Is that maybe that's their strength, but they can't articulate, they can't converse, they don't like socialization. Whereas you go to the other extreme and it's what maybe they've seen in self-contained classrooms at times, where it's a child who's really having difficulty vocalizing, engaging at all in the learning experience. So this middle area has got to be a conundrum for most families. So maybe it's helping to break down these levels, because the diagnostic standards have changed over the years. And now we have these three levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. And I know that you mentioned you don't want to go to the severity, but now there's this level system. So how does that pair out?
Yes, complicated. With everything with autism, it's complicated in that there's the level system to help. I think often providers sort of give a shorthand to let someone else know what to expect for how much support this child's going to need. If you are a teacher at school or an ABA provider or a psychologist, you can see that level and kind of just have a general sense of what to expect for how much support someone's going to need. In daily life, I think it's a little bit more complicated, and the levels can be a little bit more flexible because people needs change so dramatically based on the situation. So you might have a kid who typically can converse really well when they're comfortable, and then you put them at Disneyland and there's a sensory overload, and they lose their ability to communicate. So with a lot of things, there's a need to not be so rigid with everything, right? And again, I think it speaks to our goal with assessment and diagnosing is to just really understand each individual child and what situations they're going to thrive in. But so level 1 typically is, we call it needs support. So that's going to be a child who and has verbal skills, are able to have some conversations, but some areas where maybe they struggle a little bit and need some extra help to get through the day. But with that extra support, is meeting most age expectations and generally doing fairly well. Level 2 is needs substantial support. So that's going to be a child who maybe has a little bit of a harder time breaking away from their special interests. Maybe can have conversations, but usually about the thing that they really like. And if you try to pull them out of that, sorts of lose their conversation abilities there, or has a more significantly difficult time transitioning away from that activity, or not engaging in kind of a preferred interests. And then a level 3 is what we call very substantial support. And that's a child who has, difficulties verbalizing to get their needs met, maybe even more substantial difficulties with transitions or engaging in other difficulties where they're really going to need kind of one-on-one attention most of the time to get through the day.
And I appreciate the way that you articulate those levels based off of really understanding the treatment that'll follow and the intensity, the levels of commitment to that treatment of service. Because within the treatment world, especially within ABA, is that you'll see is that the intensity of service and the prescribed dosage is very important. Mm-hmm. So what you might see is that a level 3 and potentially level 2 children might have some pretty intense dosage of treatment in order to be as successful as you might want for them to really start developing all those skills that are going to help them be independent. Whereas a level 1 might be a little bit more focused. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A child with level 1 kind of symptomology is going to be kind of the child I was talking about at the beginning, where most of the time they're doing really well, but maybe have these periods of more intense difficulty, and knowing and understanding that is kind of the key to services. And so they need a little bit less, maybe hours to deal with that.
Now I'm gonna have to prod a little bit because I really want to get into your craft right now. So, and this is my mind spinning a little bit, but access to care is such a challenging issue in our field. And when you have a child who's maybe demonstrating at the highest level of support and is more than likely diagnostically going to fit the categorization of autism, is this a different diagnostic process than somebody who might be level 1 and might have other issues or conditions that are contributing to what's going on? Is it more cumbersome? Is it easier to do? I mean, from a psychological standpoint, how does this pair out? I don't know how this works.
So, to your question about, is it a different process? It's kind of yes and no. So going back to kind of those core areas that are affected by autism, those are always the things that I'm looking into. So we're always going to be looking at cognitive skills, at language skills, social skills. All of those things are going to be looked at. It's really the tools that I use to look at them are going to change based on the child and maybe how much verbal skills they have, their age, their ability to participate in the assessment. But what I'm looking at is similar. As kids get older, or even if there's more just complexity medically, or they've had more anxiety or trauma or something else that can complicate the picture, it can make it a little bit more challenging because you want to really understand, again, that full picture. And I don't know how often this has come up on the podcast, but, psychological diagnoses are complex and human behavior is obviously very complex. And so the same behavior can come from different areas and different things depending on what's going on. ADHD, anxiety, trauma, autism can all sort of mimic each other in some ways. So it can be a process to tease it apart and kind of put it together in a way that makes sense.
And I think that does make a lot of sense as far as, even what tools and what skills you're going to have to bring to the table yourself in order to get to some of these more complex versus some of the more rote diagnostics. Not that anything is ever really rote, but the way you're describing it, it sounds like the autism used to be, at least conceptually, and how it was perceived in the public, as far as if you have a diagnosis of autism, that's what you have your entire life, and that's a lifelong diagnosis, which makes sense. But when you're looking at these levels, that to me would indicate potentially we're talking about a fluid process. It's something where maybe you are autistic, but the level of severity of support might change over time, and you might be moving across that spectrum, even though we didn't want to refer to it that way, is that the spectrum of supports might change. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It is 100% possible to float between those levels based on need and situation, and that's part of our goal in providing services and support for children, is to help them need less support in the future. And by nature, then that would make them, change levels down to kind of a level 1. If we're able to fade services and they're able to thrive. That's all we want for kids, right? Is for them to thrive in every way that they can.
And if you're a psychologist or even a developmental pediatrician who's going through the process of doing the diagnoses and doing the testing and preparing the family for what's going on, is that described? I mean, is it talked about on these levels? Is it talked about with the enhancement of, these supports are really going to be important for you, but I do want to see you back, because the chance is that we will be able to improve upon that over time, where supports can be withdrawn. Is that a dialogue that's happening amongst most practitioners, or is this still new to the field?
I hope it is. I would hope it is. From from the conversations on our psychology team, I know that those are conversations that are happening at least here within ABS Kids, because we see it. We see kids grow and change, and that reevaluation process can be really helpful. We don't have a lot of great data on outcomes for autistic kids. There's just a lot of variability in kids, and we're able to diagnose younger and younger now, which is great, because then we're getting support for these really young kids and can really affect the trajectory of their life in a lot of really helpful ways. And so from a psychologist point of view, the more data points I have for a kid, the better I can point parents towards the future and help them plan. And so that's where kind of coming back in and having that follow-up can be really helpful for a parent to feel is empowered for what to expect in the future, so they're not kind of being blindsided by, how their child changes and what sort of sports they're going to need in the future.
So now you have my mind going all over the place, but you're painting a picture, and I'm going to actually put you in a situation where you're telling me this is a world where access to care is no problem. And continuity of care, it's now my number one focus, because there's so many psychologists in the world that everybody's able to get assessments whenever they want.
I love this world.
How often? No, wouldn't that be wonderful? How often would you like to see the children back so that you can reevaluate some of these skills if access to care wasn't a challenge and growth within the psychology industry and within the practice of clinicians was rapidly progressing?
Ideally, and of course, like everything, this is going change a little bit depending on individual circumstances. But typically, after an initial evaluation, I would want to give it 2 to 3 years before I would see a child back, or kind of in that kindergarten or right before kindergarten range. So if I diagnose a child at 2, I'd want to see them kind of around 5 to help prepare for school and get a picture of, okay, you've had maybe 2-3 years of services now. Let's see where you're at right now and what kinds of things, support in school might be the most helpful for you. And then kind of every 3 years, spacing it out a little bit as kids get older, really before major transitions. So late elementary school, let's help prepare for what middle school might look like. Middle school, let's prepare for what supports are needed in high school. Late high school, let's prepare for what adulthood would look like, with as needed assessments if something were to change. If a child starts seeming more anxious or gets into first grade and all of a sudden, there's some attention problems here that need to be addressed, something like that. But it's really, again, in those major life milestones to help guide the family and that child through life and through development.
Yeah, I watch my daughters go through all these milestones and they're called transitional periods for a reason.
Yes.
Is that I see this and it's like, gosh, new skills are needed every single time. And having the access to a psychological evaluation for somebody who maybe perceives the world slightly different or has different inputs that are occurring, it's always going to be that much more important to be able to help guide on how to be able to enhance their experience. When you have these meetings with the families and you're debriefing on your diagnosis, and I guess I'm going to try and do this as 3 parts, but say you have somebody who is at that level 3 level of supports, what is it that you're explaining to the family as far as your advice, as far as your recommendations? Walk me through that process. And I know it's going to be different for every family, but what are some of the commonalities that you're expressing there?
Yeah. In that situation, we're talking a lot about how to make sure everyone has the support that's going to be needed. A child with kind of that level of disability and kind of that significant need for support, it's difficult, and I'm helping the parents understand how much help they're going to need for that child. And then also, one of my goals is to help the parents feel supported too. So walking them through, helping them feel supported and that they have the resources to deal with that and kind of their own emotional reaction to what's happening. And again, kind of giving them guides for the future support and what to expect, which is going to change depending on kind of how old the child is.
The prognosis question is always so hard to get to, but the fact that you're helping the family to be able to process, I think is really important. Prior to the advent of more clinic-based care, I couldn't imagine as a family just on that first day being like, hold on, now I'm going to have 30 hours a week of people in and out of my house and doing treatment constantly. It's a big change of life. And it requires some additional attention and support and helping people to realize the short-term pain that maybe is leading to that long-term gain and how the family structure can still be a family structure despite that.
Yes. I often like to talk to parents about they've been taking on all the roles for that child up to that point. They've been trying to teach, they've been trying to counsel, they've been trying to parent. And so I like it to frame it as, now we're going to take over the teaching and sort of counseling part of it, and you get to just be their parent. And so you might have less time with them during the day, but hopefully that time can be more intentionally just, we get to hang out and enjoy each other, not worry about all the other stuff that maybe a therapist can take over.
Yeah, getting to that point of being able just to be and enjoy your family and enjoy your children it's something we all thrive on and that we all seek. So how about the other end? I'm going to skip level 2 right now, just because level 2 I feel like is a mixed mash, like everything's in there.
Yes.
But how about this level 1? It sounds like it'll be a very different conversation, in my opinion, with the family in understanding their diagnosis. But is it, or am I off? I mean, is this a different conversation you're having?
It might be less different than you would expect. Just because, autism it's a neurodevelopmental thing. And so there are long-term effects. And so there's still some changes in potentially expectations for families. It really depends on sort of where the family's coming in from, as far as kind of what they think is their plan. Sometimes I have found level 1 to be really hard for just different sorts of reasons.
Could that be just because with level 1 is that there's so much that they're seeing amongst every other child in their child, and that there's one or two things that they feel like, well, why can't I, and I'm going to put quotation marks around this, fix this? I mean, is that the thought process where it's just discouraging? Whereas at level 3, there's a lot of work I need to do, and I'm going to put in and invest that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it often comes down to, as parents, we create this picture of what we expect our kids' life to be like. And the more dramatically we have to change that picture, the harder it can be. And so that's where I think our expectations as parents coming in can really affect that. And there's kind of just that grieving process in my kid's life is going to look differently than what I've been dreaming about since I knew they were coming. And that can be just a really hard process. But it doesn't mean it's a bad life, right? It's just different. And that's often the conversation I'm having with families with a level 1 diagnosis is this might look different than what you've expected, but they have all of these strengths to still really succeed in life and what's going to make them happy. And I tend to focus a lot on doing kind of strengths-based assessments. So we're having lots of conversations about these are all the areas that your kid's thriving and situations that make it easier for your kid to thrive. And let's help put them in those situations, even if it doesn't look the same as what you would have expected.
Yeah, and I would imagine every single family appreciates that so much because there's nobody who goes through life with all their expectations being met all the time.
Right.
It's understanding and appreciating where you are at any given minute that I think is valuable, that taking that step back and looking at the strengths assessment has got to be so important. Yeah. Well, I one thing that I do want to end on is just, you mentioned the access now to younger and younger diagnostics, but there are still people who have questions when they're older. I mean, so what is your recommendation to families as they're even questioning or concerned about the potential of something? It used to be almost like a demarcation or something like that something's wrong and it's not good. But I mean, now you're looking at autism, and how do you help families to say, you know what, take that step in to figure out what's going on, and not feel stigmatized through the process?
I think the work that kind of providers and the autistic community are doing as a whole is really helping with that, just as so many people are coming forward and being open about their autism diagnosis. And so you're seeing more people in pop culture and the world talk about autism. It's getting destigmatized a little bit, and we're kind of just recognizing that it's just a difference and kind of just the whole neurodiversity movement and recognizing that all of our brains are just different and it's okay and we can figure it out together. My advice for parents is always the minute that you're starting to wonder, it's best to just go ahead and talk to someone about it. To sort it out, even if it's not a full evaluation, if it's just consulting with a psychologist about what you're seeing. Any information is good information, and the more you can understand your child, the better you're going to feel as a parent. And so, yeah, just the more you can learn and ask those questions, the better. We've also just learned that the brain is way more plastic than we ever thought, especially in those early years. So the earlier that we can start seeing your kid and working with them, just the more long-lasting changes can be made, and you can really see a lot of amazing progress with those early intervention years. So just don't hesitate to ask. You're never going to regret seeking some help and not needing it than realizing 3, 4, 5 years down the road, oh man, this is something I wish we had gotten help sooner. And parent guilt is real. So do whatever you can to alleviate yourself of that and kind of just ask those questions.
Yeah, I think that's such cogent advice. And quite frankly, I think I've heard that so many times, but it's one that we almost have to beat the drum to. It's got to just kind of keep putting it out there, is that, there's no reason to have a stigma around having a diagnosis of autism, because all it is a difference, as you described.
Right.
And secondly, if we know that we can help to be able to give that person, empower that person to be able to achieve all they want to in life by helping sooner, then let's take the right steps to get there. So, well, Dr. Rogers, I appreciate your time today. I mean, you took a very complex issue of all these levels with autism, and you simplified it in a way where I think that it now becomes digestible. It's understandable kind of, how these things work, and that it really isn't a gradient of where you are with skill, but more of a understanding of how do we need to provide that support. And I think that's a good way to process that information. So I appreciate you taking the time today to talk with us about this. And I think it's going to be so informative for parents and clinicians alike.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.